Hello and welcome back to my channel. This evening I have invited what some may have called a controversial figure within the fight against public displays of fetish to speak with me despite the personal blowback that may come my way. Jon Uhler has worked with sex offenders in the prison system and has seen firsthand the manipulative tactics of what he calls, quote, the world's greatest liars and deceivers. While I'm aware of the concerning elements in the campaigns against Jon with regards to his personal life, I find the work that he does in explaining deviance, paraphilia, and sexual predation to be invaluable, especially as I continue developing the theoretical framework of multiple paraphilia exposure and addiction. In a post-COVID world, appeals to authority, credentialism, and the expert class have frankly become a silencing tool against those of us holding the line. So it is my belief that anyone who has valuable insight to contribute should have a voice. Our society has been groomed over time to tolerate and even celebrate paraphilic behavior, and I believe those who have taken a position that paraphilias are innate, immutable sexual orientations are either misguided fools or controlled opposition. Whether it be sexologists who seek to normalize adding pedophilia to the list of sexual orientations, or self-published authors pushing for a new label on the queer theory euphemism treadmill called autosexuality, powerful forces have coalesced to force us to accept a certain amount of public paraphilia under the guise of free speech and expression. As a woman who has accepted that I was groomed and manipulated into indulging the paraphilias I once struggled with, it is my belief that the acceptable amount of paraphilia in civilized society is zero. It is for this reason I've invited Jon to have this conversation, and it is my sincere hope that this calculated risk be taken in good faith by my audience, as I know it will not be by my detractors. For the sake of keeping this interview focused, I will not be paying attention to the chat, and any super chats that may come in via YouTube will be addressed at a later date. With all this in mind, please welcome to the stage, Jon Uhler. Hi, Jon. How are you?
Feeling good. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, so I was supposed to stream on Twitter, but I'm having technical difficulties, so we're just coming at you live from YouTube. But I will, once I finish the stream, I'm going to figure out the technical difficulties with X and see if I can upload it there, because I think I'll get a lot more traction there. So while we have a couple viewers, hopefully more people will show up. In the meantime, if you'd like to introduce yourself and your background, please go ahead.
Well, again, pleasure to be with you. Kaylee and I, by trade, I'm a therapist, been doing therapy for a little over 30 years now. I have three primary populations that I work with, although I've worked with all sorts of populations. Survivors, severely emotionally disturbed adolescents, and predators, sexual predators, all of which are very pertinent to what we're going to be talking about. Found myself entering into these waters probably back in 2016, 17-ish, when I was pulled into a Facebook discussion where somebody reached out to me because they knew of my background, which is, as far as predators, been doing sex offender treatment or working with sex offenders for about 15 years. My background working with survivors is I understand the world of severe trauma, so I work with those whose personalities have been shattered, or what is now called dissociative identity disorder. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of folks on my caseload that wrestle with that. Worked in a lot of settings with troubled teens, troubled kids. Those are the kids that are targeted by the trans movement, by the way. Mm-hmm. And that gives me the ability to speak to that issue and to tell people that the trans movement is man-made. It is a farce. It is a ruse. It's a lie. It's a scam. It's a scheme. Mm-hmm. And there's been 20 years worth of brainwashing.
Yes.
So it comes as a shock, but that then sets the background to what we're going to talk about, because back in 2005, I was hired by the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections I didn't know it at the time that something didn't exist like it. But as time went on, I figured out why I had been recruited. I started what amounts to be, or what is what was the nation's first intensive treatment program for what were called the worst of the worst. Pennsylvania, I think, is the fourth largest prison population.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was working with those men that nobody else could work with. And nobody had put together a treatment program for that population. Through that, you get a chance to see what no academic outside researcher can ever see. And I didn't know that either at the time, but now I'm knowing what I know. And so through that, accrued more clinical contact hours than any single psychology staff member in Canada or the US. I also am certified in the hair psychopathy checklist, so I'm certified to provide forensic assessments for courts when it comes to psychopaths. Headed up for a year one of Pennsylvania's standalone specialized treatment unit for sexually violent predators. And then dealt with sex offenders. We did high and low intensity treatment, hundreds and hundreds of risk assessments, specialized parole evaluations, and then once having retired from the prison system after 11 years, and I was doing other kind of groups, and including in charge of, I had a lot of mental health clients, mental health inmates.
Mm-hmm.
Then became a sex offender treatment provider, certified sex offender treatment provider. I'm also a certified trauma professional. And I have a full-time caseload working with both just regular folks, those that have been severely traumatized, and then those that are justice involved, as they say. And then with my work, I guess it's my own work, advocacy, dealing with the trans deception, as I call it, kind of waded into those waters by somebody asking me to speak to the issue of MAPS. I had never heard of the term. Well, there we go. So minor attracted persons. And so I quickly discovered that there was a push at that time, now it's been full blown, to redefine or rebrand or airbrush pedophilia.
Mm-hmm.
And so along with minor attraction, you quickly heard the term non-offending or virtuous pedophile. And I'm here to tell you that is a lie. Okay, James Canner won't debate me on the issue if he'd like to. I've issued a number of invitations. Okay.
Yeah.
So we can talk about that. That fits into this. And then I quickly discovered that led into other discussions of communities by virtue of who appeared on my social media threads, which were the furries. And I learned about furries when I was working in the prison system from the most heinous of pedophiles.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can talk about how furries is simply the most deviant of groups that are providing the most effective means of accessing kids. It's the most dangerous of groups. No parent should have their kids involved in furries. And if you're an adult involved in furries, I first want to help encourage you to grow in terms of your character development and start to do something useful with yourself rather than being stuck playing dress up. Okay, so that's the first issue. Then I started to deal with Drag Queen Story Hour. Okay, and then what else? We had waded into anime and the deviant art stuff, so that came up. And then eventually, what else have I tackled? I don't know. It'll come to my mind. I've been tackling all sorts of stuff. And the bottom line is this: I'm very straightforward. Why? Because I'm protective of women and children, number one. And because I've worked with kids and severely damaged kids in residential treatment group homes, I've run those. I can tell you that I know what the characteristics are, and I know how they can be manipulated. And so I'm here to, I guess I'm a voice crying in the wilderness. But because of my perspective in terms of chronology of my career, I can tell you there was a day and age that trans was not a thing because it was not invented. And so I can speak to the issue. I can tell people, aside from 20 years of brainwashing, it doesn't exist, and therefore it's a tremendously effective marketing ploy that has a lot of special interests. They're harming kids. And the only people that don't like that are those that stand to profit in one way or another off of grooming kids and profit either financially or sexually. So the entire trans movement is a sham, but a very real and dangerous one. And anybody has a standing offer to come on my own platforms if they want. Or, we can, Kaylin, we can have you host it. And I have a simple offer to anyone. Show me your background. And if you would like to debate anything to do with safeguarding and how you screen for predation and how you screen for trauma, let's talk.
Yeah. Well, something that, I'm getting an echo. Do you by any chance have headphones?
I don't.
No. Okay. All right. I'm getting a little bit of an echo coming back, but I think it's okay now. Something that people tend to not understand and that you talk about is that if a child is expressing a desire to be the opposite sex, that meets the requirements for like mandatory reporting, because that means that child has been groomed in some way
100%,
or abused.
100%.
So,
Well, let me speak to that for a moment.
Oh, yeah.
Caitlin, let's speak to that. That's very important. Yeah. Okay, because this forms the basis. I'm just looking at the lighting in here. I look really, everybody will have to change my lighting. Okay.
Don't worry about it.
And this really forms and hopefully will inform people. I want people as best they can to set aside their emotional responses. And let's just talk for a second. Let's think this through, because it matters. Why? Because we're talking about kids. We're talking about young people. Hopefully all of us want to protect women and children. Hopefully all of us want the best for people. Okay. So the question is this. If left alone, if left to themselves, just allowed to be a kid, okay, will a kid have an actual, what we think in terms of as adults, when we say we're having sexual thoughts, we know what that means. Mm-hmm. Hormones are involved, and we understand attraction and lust and all that. Okay. Prior to puberty, if a child is left alone and not influenced, now, how are you ever going to find a child these days? But let's pretend the days before the internet. I'm old enough, I remember what that was like, the days before phones. So let's pretend. Little house on the prairie, I don't know. Okay. Prior to puberty, does a child have a sexual thought? They don't.
No.
They don't. Now, they will acknowledge and recognize sex characteristics, but then they'll move on. Mm-hmm. But they go through various predictable stages. So when a child and an infant, when they're very young, they don't know the difference. And then when they get to about 2 or developmentally, all of a sudden, the little boy and girl are playing, and it's like, oh, we're different. And show me yours, but it's not a sexual thing. It's anatomical. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's when they notice the difference between male and female dogs, and not sexual, and that's deviant, right? It's like, oh, that's a male horse. That's a male dog. How do we know? It has a penis. Mm-hmm. And then they'll move on. They won't dwell on it. Okay. Then they get to a point in developmental stages where it doesn't matter they at first it's anatomical, then it goes through a stage where they're grouping based upon sex or gender. So boys will then want to be around boys, girls will tend to want to be around girls, and that's when, even in the movie Despicable Me. Remember Gru when he's growing up? It shows these scenes, and Gru is on the playground, and they all say, "Oh, Gru has cooties." So the kids will go through a stage where the boys don't want to be around the girls because of cooties. So you'll see when kids get into early elementary school, boys will play with boys and girls will play with girls. But then as it starts to get into middle school, eventually, or probably about 4th to 5th grade, then the sex, actual male female differences will start to lessen, and now they start to play, and that's where you have best friends. That's where a girl and a boy can be best friends.
Yeah.
We would even say oftentimes it's androgynous. They don't even know. They just they play football together, or they play activities together. They don't. It's not a thing. Not until hormones kick in, and then that's the awkward stage. And the first one in the class, they really become awkward. Again, we're talking if there's no outside undue influencing. So the first boy or first girl that starts, the hormones kick in, they start to become a little self-conscious, and their buddy, their buddy all of a sudden now is a buddy with now I don't know if I'm attracted. And how do I make sense of that? Okay, that's not uncommon. Okay. That's without any influences. And then before you know it, physiologically and cognitively and emotionally, those things will tend to pair to where maturity is starting to happen and conceptual thing. They're going from more black and white thinking or concrete reasoning to more abstract reasoning. And then you start to have higher ordered thinking, such as commitment, such as relationships. And those will tend to all go together. Okay. That's normal human development. That's normal sexual development. So you notice the issue of sex and sexuality, as far as now what our culture is saturated in, as far as sex, that would never have entered into a kid's mind if that didn't come from the outside in.
Yeah.
So if a kid at age 4, at age 6, or what we're hearing, this is very common. I knew I was by the age of 10. Okay, now, if we care about kids, and if you're in a field where you're a mandated reporter, the very first thing that should come to your mind is what? Because that kid at age 10 hasn't hit puberty yet.
Yeah. Where did that idea come from?
We already know this concept, supposedly, so they already have been sexualized by age 8 to know what bi is. So that means you had a kid, you guaranteed have a kid, you have a kid that has been perped on, that's been groomed and then perped on. For somebody to say, I knew I was bisexual at age 10, I can tell you that somebody sexually crossed boundaries with that kid at age 8 and 9, probably 7, 8, and 9. So by the time they're 10, you have some adult, the same sex adult. In that case, let's say you had an older female that was grooming this kid. So what we're talking about is a sexual abuse victim.
Yeah.
That should concern all of us.
And in terms of the wider society, this is why I'm working on this concept, which a friend of mine, Jennifer Thomas, coined, of multiple paraphilia exposure, and how not only is it a top-down orchestrated event or a series of events that have been thrust upon the public, but going back to this idea of our society is so sex saturated that it's almost impossible to shield a child from this type of deviant display of paraphilia and overt sexuality. So it's like we're almost in the throes of this thing that's happening where how do we protect children from the society as a whole when it's totally saturated in sex and sexuality? It's like you can't escape it.
That's right. And so what we need to, my recommendation is that we begin to, first of all, become committed to the issue of safeguarding, being protective of women and children. Again, that's my bias. But we need to think seriously about safeguarding, because we have to understand how many predators there are out there and what makes a predator. And one of the greatest tragedies, in my estimation, about this grand ruse called trans is there's become a lack of education. There used to be, the population used to understand the difference between men and women, male and female.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm a predator, the one thing I want you not to figure out is that there's a difference, because if I'm going after girls, if I'm going after females, if I can if I can cause you to not understand the male psyche and male sexuality, I've got you.
Mm.
I'm going to play you for all you're worth. But if you understand there's a fundamental difference in the male psyche and male sexuality, now you're going to be educated so you can be wise and you can have boundaries and you can be discerning. The trans movement removes the ability to be discerning because it dumbs down intuition, and that's all a predator needs. All a predator needs is for you to not trust your intuition. And what message are women being given when you have a cross-dressing guy that goes into your space?
Mm-hmm.
You should be very concerned. Why? Because now I can speak definitively that any guy that dresses in drag and women's underwear, he puts on women's underwear before drag, if he's even wearing underwear. Yeah, I'm coming from having worked with sex offenders for 15 years. If somebody doesn't like this, I simply want to ask a couple questions. Tell me your background and tell me your experience working with sexual predators. And I can tell you, it's very simple. I have really yet to find an exception. Those that get most agitated with me are those that have the least amount of experience.
And I found that from what I can glean, the academics, guys like Cantor, Bailey, and Blanchard, are siloed to this world of academia where they are not in the real world, and they're not seeing what the worst of the worst can possibly be. It's like they have this romanticized idea of transvestic fetishism as this harmless expression of sexuality, or it's a compulsion, but it's not that bad and it can be managed. And, like you said earlier, the idea of virtuous pedophiles, all three of them are on the Virtual Pedophiles website as supporters of it. So it's very frustrating when these sexologists become sort of the gospel truth of cross-dressing when they aren't in the prison systems, they're in the world of academia.
Right. And so what people need to understand is this. First of all, Cantor says he's worked with sex offenders. Now, I've listened to enough of his interviews that, based, if I'm quoting him properly, his experience is 6 months while he was getting his doctoral degree. Okay. 6 months in what? A sex offender treatment group. Well, what's a sex offender treatment group on the street, in the community? Okay, it's guys that are on parole or probation. You're only going to be a part of a sex offender group if you've been busted. What were you doing prior? What was a guy who's a sex offender? What was the guy doing prior to getting busted?
He was doing everything he was doing to not get busted. Right? Just doing the same thing. It just wasn't busted.
Right? He was busted for doing what he was doing. Now the question is, how long was he doing that for? And how long did he not get busted for? And are you going to get the truth out of him? So the most unreliable of populations as far as interviewing and self-report, people need to understand this. By nature, men that are into sexual deviance are the world's greatest liars. So therefore, if your ability to garner any kind of research information, I'm not minimizing, but think this through, because we hear these academics that will put forth information like it is gospel truth, like the research shows. So the first question any of us should ask is, what was their method? And what you're going to have is this: dealing with sex offenders. I can tell you that Blanchard, Bailey and Cantor, 100% guaranteed. You only have two places you're going to work with sex offenders. And the only time somebody becomes a sex offender is once they're arrested. You have no virtuous pedophile that hasn't been arrested yet. Now,
Yeah.
let me rework that. Okay, now, why would a guy...
why would a guy who doesn't have
insurance,
anything to
it's an insurance policy. I'm going to tell you, ready? Everybody needs to understand this. If anybody comes forward prior to being busted and says they're a virtuous pedophile, I want you to know two things. First of all, you're listening to what the words that are coming out of their mouth. So we're taking their word for it. Taking their word for what? That they're not offending. Have you followed them 24/7? You haven't. So I'm taking my word. I'm taking the word of a guy that says he's quote unquote attracted to kids. Nobody's attracted. It's called lust, number one. Okay. Do you think he's not accessing porn? In this day and age, do you think he's accessing porn? All of those three sex researchers downplay the influence of porn on the male mind. Yeah. That should concern everyone.
Yes. And I've noticed that across the board for a lot of people that I see on the internet. I follow like statistics guys because I'm really into stats and dispelling, for example, this idea back when like Black Lives Matter was happening, that there were like thousands of unarmed Black men getting shot by police officers. And then you actually look at the statistics and it's like 19 a year. So I always want to make sure that I'm looking at stats, and I get presented with statistics that just don't intuitively make sense to me, that porn doesn't have as a serious effect, especially on the male psyche. It does on the women as well. It's like it's training them to accept a certain type of abuse, and it can rot their brains as well. But I feel like men are so vulnerable and susceptible to this kind of brainwashing. And then I'm presented with, I don't know if it's statistics that are funded by pimps and pornographers or if it's just wishful thinking, but it's getting to be a huge problem culturally, societally. It's having a negative effect on everybody. And it's making it normal to put pornographic imagery out into the world where kids can very easily see it in advertising, film, television. It's everywhere. Even if they don't stumble upon it on the internet, if they're not allowed on the internet, there's very pornographic imagery just out in the world that I see on billboards.
That's right. And when you're researching porn, people need to understand that anytime you hear somebody's done research, the very first thing that needs to come to any of our minds is, how did they conduct it? So that's called methodology. What method? And when it comes to studying porn and the effects of porn, how are you going to study that? It always comes down to an interview. Really what it comes down to is a self checklist. Right? So they will give guys that, unless they sit down with them, but still, now we're taking at face value what a guy's saying. And the question is, what kind of guy would be inclined to participate? That matters as well. So where are you giving this? Are you giving it on a college campus to a bunch of college guys? And if I'm a guy that's going to participate in this study, am I doing it voluntarily or not? That matters. If I'm doing it voluntarily, why would I be interested? All the things I could be doing with my time. Why is that of interest? So am I being paid as a voluntary? If I'm not doing it voluntarily, I'm probably locked up. So it matters. So now you're dealing with issues of credibility. And so the question, so you have to look at the population, have to look at the motivation, and then you have to ask yourself, are they being transparent?
Yeah.
And therefore, to take the information you're going to get, generally speaking, then you have to assume when it has to do with issues of sex and sexuality and lust, guys are going to underreport what they're really into. So whatever the stats are, you can increase it by X number exponential. So let me ask you this. Not just participating, but let's say we see a guy who happens to cross-dress, and now he's in public, and now he's pushing boundaries. The question is, what has gotten into him to do that
Right.
in this day and age?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the reality is for sex offenders is 100%, really ever since the internet. Okay, the issue, by the way, we'll define deviance. Maybe we can bring up that first chart that I sent to you.
Okay, yeah.
What's important to understand is the issue of deviance, and deviance is very important to understand for the general audience. We hear that term, it's out of it comes from stats, meaning X number of deviations outside the norm. But I want people to understand, this is hot off the press. I'm going to be developing this more. I developed this in the past 30 minutes. Okay, so you see the word deviance. When it comes to sex and sexuality, for male deviance, you have to understand that when a guy becomes deviant, first of all, it's a process. And when somebody becomes deviant, they're no longer normal. A man is no longer normal, or he's in the process of becoming a predator. On top of that blue line, we could actually insert behaviors. What would we see?
Mm-hmm.
The more overtly sexualized a guy is, I can tell you he's already somewhere at about a 5 or lower. I've scaled 1 to 10 right there. Okay, so
Okay, yeah.
hopefully this is going to be helpful. So we can spot a guy in a dress. We can spot a guy who wants to use the women, who says he identifies with the opposite sex so that he can go into Planet Fitness's locker rooms.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what you have, and this eventually I'll be building this out, but this will hopefully help the audience see that over on the left we have what I'm calling normal sexuality. Okay, men are visually oriented, meaning we notice, and women intuitively understand that because that's why most women will put makeup on and dress up. Right? You look at a date. When two people go on a date, a guy and a gal, the gal's probably going to spend more time than the guy will. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Well, as a matter of fact, think of the two industries that are never going to go out of business: hairstylists and, hair salons, and the makeup industry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, why? Because this is how we're made, and it's okay. Actually, I think it's a wonderful God-given difference. Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
So. Even the song from the musical South Pacific, it says, "Some enchanted evening across a crowded room," right? We notice one another, eye to eye. And so a woman catches a guy's eye. It doesn't mean he's a schmuck, doesn't mean he's a predator. That's just how it operates. And that's a good thing. If any of us got married or have ever been attracted to somebody, it's usually you catch one another's eye first, and then there may be chemistry after that, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you have normal sexuality, but that also has to do with, I'm not separating physical from emotional from character. It's a complete package deal, and it's character-based.
Mm.
Okay. So that's normal. So we used to, for guys, it used to mean that as a guy was noticing a woman, he was not going to pursue her if he wasn't intent upon following through with commitment.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we live in a society that character doesn't matter. Yeah. If a guy gets into lust, so attraction is different than lust, especially for a guy. Yeah. Once lust kicks in, now where's that difference? Don't really know, but it's a very subtle thing. And the difference is this, that I'm beginning to now separate character from chemistry. That's an interesting way to put it. Maybe that's the best way to put it.
Right.
That I'm now starting to view the other person, and what's starting to pull me is not for the best interest of all involved. It's becoming more selfish.
Right.
So lust by nature is self-centered. And I just put there's 4 stages. You won't see this written anywhere. It's just me now coming up with it. And if I can read what I wrote. Okay, so I was thinking the very first stage, right, it's really continuum and it morphs, and women need to understand this because we live in a society that's going to tell you to maybe dress provocatively and just get, okay. So you need to understand the male psyche and who you're dealing with, meaning men in general. Okay, so the first stage is going to be if a guy starts to become very selfish and self-focused, he can separate out issues of caring concern about the other person. Now I'm just seeing a body.
Right.
Okay. If a guy allows that to progress, now it's going to become more egocentric. So first, I kind of differentiated out selfish versus self-centered. So we're talking selfishness is growing, and hence the degree of egocentricity. And it's all about self. Okay. Then the next, and that's a really important between, again, these are just me coming up with stages, but stage 2 and 3, look at the difference now. All of a sudden, one was I'm getting ego needs met, but I'm still sort of having a relationship with someone, but it's friends with benefits or whatever we want to say. To all of a sudden notice a shift now. Now I don't even care for friends any longer, so to speak.
Right.
It's now very much about me and my needs. And you better start to meet my needs, and then eventually we get into self-gratification. That's the key point for a guy where if he allows himself to go any further into self-gratification, he will. And then it becomes all about self.
Right.
Yeah. Look at the objectification. That's why I drew that top bracket. It's really where the left side of the beginning of objectification starts, it's going to continue on.
Right.
Where it's no longer the way our minds were designed, I believe, by God, was to place a high value on people, care and concern for people. So we love people and use things.
Right.
The more into self and selfishness I get, it's going to become inverted, but by degree. So it's being inverted by notches, where eventually, so we could say on the far left, if we were to draw a continuum and also kind of a cascade-like effect downward, we would have in the upper left quadrant, we would have a high value of people and a low value of things. We take care of, but meaning in order of priority, I love people and use things. We could put then on the bottom right, because I wanted to show the idea that people are getting lower in terms of character. That once I go from the left and I drop in terms of character, if I'm a guy, now I'm using people and loving things. Now we see that in quote unquote polite society on Good Friday as people will trample one another in Walmart for a TV.
Yeah.
So that's objectification too, by the way.
Yeah.
So
that could be a result too of we live in a very consumerist society, and now the body has been commodified to a point where we're just being reduced to body parts at this point.
There we go. Okay. As a matter of fact, a number of the guys that I used to work with would have a lot of tattoos. If anybody's seen the MOB on knuckles, you may see MOB, money over bitches. Don't like that phrase. What is that? Money over? Okay.
Yeah.
Kind of very street talk. But what does that mean? It's like, I'll use you, but I'm all about money. Well, at least he puts it out there. There's no surprise what the guy's all about. Okay. So you have an overlaying of character issues, and then behavior will follow. So somebody needs to understand what happens. The more selfishness, and ultimately that's how you understand, that's how people need to understand male sexuality. That the more self-centered it becomes, the more self-centered it will grow. And now he moves from seeing a woman as an important person to now a body and something to be used for self-gratification. But then that reaches about the middle of, or maybe just between manipulator and perpetrator. Okay, so there's the objectification process that's taking place. And again, why are we talking about any of this? Because what you're going to see, let's say we're thinking in terms of an iceberg. This is all under the surface.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And everything we do for a reason. And therefore, what you can see, if I took the time and I were to write down behaviors, and how about even quote unquote outfits or dress or what the guy is into, you can plot it in a way. You can see what a guy's all about and where he is on this continuum. And so if I know I have a guy who's dressing in drag and pushing boundaries, guess where I'm going to plot him?
Mm-hmm.
He's not over in the far left.
Yeah.
Okay. He is already predatorial. That's why he's out in polite society pushing boundaries. Why isn't he staying at home?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the way that I've been conceptualizing with the paraphilia addiction, if a man is leaving the house emboldened enough to be cross-dressing or in a furry outfit or something like that, he is displaying multiple paraphilias at once because of the exhibitionism, the either the cross-dressing or the fetishistic, the transvestic fetishism, or just the fetishistic disorder in and of itself. Because then, like with the furries, like that's like zoophilia and things like that. So they're putting out on display. They have multiple paraphilias, and they're not ashamed of it. So
that's right.
And they're exposing us to it.
That's right. And one way to understand paraphilias, and again, I have a DSM right behind me. I can talk shop. But what I'll tell you is this: from my estimation, if you're a clinician and you actually are dealing with paraphilias, you're either a joke or you're agenda driven. Because if somebody comes to see you, first of all, who's going to come to see you and say, I got a paraphilia? Some guy that's either trying to do an insurance policy. Those are the people that work with Cantor. Why? In case they get busted, because then they can say I fell off the wagon. Or you want to be enabled so that you can tell someone, well, or you have an excuse, quite frankly. Because if I have somebody comes in focused on, I've dealt with some guys that they come in and that's their focus. Okay. As a clinician, in my mind, if that stays as your focus, you're not doing right by your client, because these are symptoms.
Yeah.
And if you focus on symptoms, if you're a therapist, what are you trying to accomplish? Because if a guy is so fixated on something, and can I tell the difference between, do I understand what a compulsion is? If I'm stuck on surface related issues, how the compulsion is manifesting itself. So either a guy or a person is compulsively driven to this, or they are play acting and they're manipulating and they're a predator, or they're doing this for a reason. Okay, it's either secondary gains or they can't help themselves. Okay, so does a guy have paraphilia or does he have a compulsive disorder? And what's underlying compulsions? It's intensity. Where's that intensity come from? Something. It's either molestation or something else. Okay. So if you're a clinician and you actually write down a diagnosis of paraphilia, in my mind, you're half-baked and you're not going to be able to help your client because you're stuck on this, like those gender therapists. Okay, what's the gender therapist focused on? The superficial stuff? Well, this kid's hurting. Why don't you go to where the hurt is? Tell me about the anxiety. Tell me about the depression. When did this kid, tell me about the boundary violations? If you are a therapist and you can't get beyond the paraphilias, you are extremely superficial and you're deficient. Okay. This is an indicator or a symptom of something. You better find out where it's coming from. Because if it's an actual deviant thing, then he's a risk to somebody, and you better find out what he's all about. And you're typically only going to find that out when he's mandated into treatment. Okay, so really the best way to understand the paraphilias. But Caitlin, I like what you're about.
Oh. Uh-oh. Okay, wait, you froze. Hold on. Uh-oh, okay. It seems like we're having technical difficulties really quickly. Let me remove him from the stage and bring him back up, see if there's anything. Oh, no. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah, you froze for a second, so I brought you back down and then hopped back up. Okay, so continue.
So I'll do respect to Blanchard aside. Nothing personal to Blanchard, even though I find that Blanchard hasn't apologized for his role in 13 people made the trans movement possible. Because without billing, you'd never have the trans movement.
Mm.
So he hasn't come out and recanted, which is pathetic. It's a lack of integrity on his part. Okay. But all things being equal, the term AGP is stupid.
Yeah, I agree. I came to that conclusion.
Get off this AGP crap and let's talk about what the issues are. Because what you're really dealing with multiple paraphilias, in my estimation, ready? Perversion. These are just perversions oozing out. His stuff is oozing out. And the more he has, the more he's oozing. And it's a really dangerous thing. The more he has, the more of a ticking time bomb in one way or another. This you're dealing with a very potentially dangerous situation. Why is he sitting in front of you? Who's going to hear about some guy say, I got multiple paraphilias? Where did the guy even learn that term? So you're dealing with somebody that's very sophisticated. And the question is, we know he's fixated and stuck on sex and sexuality. So you have a guy that's sexually fixated. Why do you think he's fixated? He's either been a survivor or he's saturating himself. And now he's potentially very dangerous. And that's where people need to understand male sexuality. So if you have a guy who's out in the open with his perversion or paraphilias, you need to understand he's out in the open for a reason and is predatorial 100%. So Phil Illy, I'll talk to you now. Why hasn't Phil ever, all they did is pile on, and they couldn't answer any of my intellectually based arguments. So what did they do? They found a bunch of ne'er-do-wells that I had to draw boundaries with in my business, in business related things. Jimmy Hinton is a fraud. I had to hold him accountable for taking my intellectual property and using it as his own, plagiarism. Nevin Hirsch never fulfilled his end of the bargain. So I finally had to say, Nevin, you know what? I fulfilled mine. I can't deal with you anymore. So they wait 8 years to do this. And my own daughter, I had to hold her accountable for not paying out a car loan. And we're going to present all the information. So Matt Osborne's little house of cards is going to come tumbling down. Okay. So, but in a couple of minutes, it'll all be settled. I'm going to produce home videos, very endearing things. It's sad what they've done, but it shows you. You notice they haven't talked about anything I've said, the content, such as this. Anybody that's involved in or has any dealings with gender-related issues, including Stella O'Malley, who said very vile things about me. Okay, she called me basically a predator. Stella hasn't told anybody that she and I were going to do an interview together.
Right.
Interesting. Okay. It wasn't until Phil Illy, the guy in the blue dress, where I raised questions like, it started with this: what the heck?
Yeah. That was my question too.
If you're going to be protective of gender confused kids, why do you have a guy that's a pervert? He's not a pervert. He's a predator. He's playing everybody for fools and he knows it. So once I came out like that, what did he do? He ran his mouth and then blocked me. Really, Phil, come on my program. We all know, you and I, Phil, both know what you're about. You're pushing boundaries and you're playing the public for fool. Okay. Yeah. This AGP thing is a bunch of crap. It's guys that are pushing boundaries that are porn saturated, but the issue is deviance, and porn fast tracks or throws jet fuel on deviance. 100%. Everybody needs to understand this. 100% of sex offenders. And who's a sex offender? Guy that finally got busted. Busted for what? Doing what he's been doing. How long? For years? So he was doing what he was doing, whatever the guy's been doing. By the time he gets busted, he was doing it for years and it progressed. 100% of sex offenders, without exception, you'll never find an exception, 100% are deeply steeped in porn prior to arrest, and 100% of pedophiles are busted with child rape porn. About 98% are busted with the dissemination or distribution. People need to understand these are very dangerous and deviant individuals. They do not need your sympathies. If you start to feel sorry for any of these guys, you're being played for a fool. And then they're just going to find out how brain dead you are.
Yeah.
because they'll keep upping it, eventually all the way into your showers and locker rooms in Planet Fitness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I've
This
seen
is really serious.
it is very serious. And I cannot stand the like the reification or the elevating of autogynephilia, which I don't even, I've stopped as much as I can from using that term because I just think it's a bunch of BS now.
Yeah,
I
just
came
say
to
it's
that
cross-dressing. These guys are
yeah,
just
it's
cross-dressing.
cross-dressing. I
That's all it
came
is.
to that realization, I don't know how many months ago, but I was just like, why are we getting into the minutia of this cross-dressing? It's not that deep. They're cross-dressers. We already had a word for it.
You're giving up very important safeguarding territory the moment you start to play into you notice who's pushing all this.
Mm-hmm.
Not women and not normal women and children that are pushing this. It's the deviant men and male sexologists and those that benefit from sexual confusion.
Mm-hmm.
So shame on Stella O'Malley and Jen Specht that if ever there's a population of vulnerable people and they invite who into that, they're not keeping them out. Stella says, oh, well, what are we supposed to do? I'll tell you what you're supposed to do. Somebody should have walked up to Phil. Phil, you know this if you're listening. Should have said, hey, buddy, what are you doing? He said, oh, I'm here. I got my little dress. I tell you exactly. Here's how you role play for the next time. It's this. Hey, buddy, what you doing? Oh, I'm here for the conference. Oh, you are? Well, I'm noticing how you dress. Oh, yeah. Do you like it? Well, no, I'll tell you what. And I would now be grabbing him, or we're locking arms because we're bonding, and I'm going to be walking him to the exit. And I'm walking him as I'm dialogue with him respectfully, and say, well, I've kind of noticed something that you're dressed as a female. Do you know who's at this convention? Yeah, sexual abuse survivors. Now, you're dressed kind of like people that have abused a lot of these people, and that's kind of insensitive at best. I kind of almost think predatory, but I never think that of you. So I tell you what, we're going to help you find the exit until you can figure out how to dress more appropriately and get out of your selfishness and think seriously about the effect you might have on other people. That's called character growth. You call me in the morning and we can dialogue whether this is the right conference for you, because we all want to be protective of survivors, don't we? Goodbye. And that's how you help him out. Instead of Stella saying, oh, we can't manage dress. Well, you can't manage safeguarding, then can you, Stella? And then you invite Bailey, you invite Canner, who all downplay porn. And what has Pornhub done to any state that does age verification? They stop servicing that state. 95%, I think 90, they had to clear out 95%, 92%, Pornhub did. Once the issue of safeguarding, meaning 18 years and younger, they've had to clear out 92% of all their pornography. What does that tell you? It's exactly what this chart shows that's up here, which is deviance for the man will always tend downward in age, because ultimately it's about, here's what deviance is, where a normal man can only get an erection when he believes or knows or senses that his partner is with him and deriving pleasure and satisfaction. That's a normal man. That's why the issue of, the mood, right? You want to see a normal guy. Let's say just before a guy's ready to climax, they're having sex, and the woman looks up and says, oh, I really need to clean the spots off the ceiling, or, I need to, right? You watch what happens. He'll lose his erection. Why? Because he knows she's not into it. That's a normal man.
Yeah.
A deviant man, deviance shifts from care and concern about the person. So if she's not in the mood, he's not going to force it because he wants her to enjoy the process. On the polar opposite end is not only objectification. So I don't care if she's into it. I got to get mine. It's all about me. I paid for the movie. That's at least okay. But that's not even really into deviance very much. Deviance is a guy can only get an erection when he knows he's producing trauma. When he's producing harm.
Yeah.
That's not a normal man. He's in it for effect. And the further a guy goes, he's then not only driven to bring about trauma, but driven. So the furthest kind of predator, this will be the sadistic kind of guy, but he can dress, he can play the part, is all about defiling and defrauding.
Mm.
That's why also the age will eventually get younger and younger. So what you will see with sex offenders eventually is that their age of preference will always start to go down, and therefore the women will try to look younger, and the kids they'll try to make look older. And you reach right at with the place what in the sex offender realm they call barely legal.
Yeah.
And from there, you're really going to define a whole lot of stuff. But just like why do you not want to legalize prostitution? Because exactly what they found anywhere else, anywhere that they legalize it, the consumption goes up, and the ages will always go down of the objects that are the kids that are going to be used, the girls that are going to be used. In Australia, it's the same. In Las Vegas or in Nevada, it's the same. That eventually they'll get into teen girls and then prepubescent. Why? That is deviance. Why? Because they're driven to have an effect, and they're driven to steal and to mar and scar. As a matter of fact, this may be a time to bring up the other chart. If somebody wants to find out more about this, I've done a series on this on SurvivorSupport.net. You can go under the third tab over for drop-down tab. And so I put together various component parts all together, scale of 1 to 10, 1 mild all the way to profound. And this is how men become predators. There's a lot of different factors in the light green. As a matter of fact, the series, you can download this chart on the chart. If you go, I'm sorry, on the page. So if you go to SurvivorSupport.net, third, it's called Help for the Journey, and then the effects of trauma. So that chart is there, and I walk the viewer through this in multiple parts. Okay, but that little red line, degrees of intensity and premeditation, that's how somebody gets into being a sadistic predator, by the way. Okay, so people need to understand that it is a progression, but you're either going to have more reactive or more sophisticated. And the more sophisticated somebody becomes, the less freakish they look. And where do they go? They go into politics. They go into positions of power, of influence. They go into finance. They go into law enforcement. They go wherever. They go into the World Economic Forum. They go into Davos. They go. Okay, so that's where we're starting.
They go into W path.
Right? They go into W path, where they look so normal by day, but by night, they're doing the most outrageous of things, including getting into castration, so unique fantasies, or unique fantasies. And then if anybody's familiar with satanic ritual abuse and MK Ultra, very real things. How do you create people, adults that are going to do that? Listen to my series and look at this chart. That's how you'll see how men become that way. And very serious, because if we can't see the warning signs, those men that are becoming predatorial, do you think they're ever going to be honest what their intentions are? No, they're driven to play people for fools, because that's the hors d'oeuvre of the overall meal. That's you become entertainment for them. So drag queen story hour, what is that all about? It's always testing insight and resolve and intuition of the adults. And so the best way to find out how easy it is, meaning how predator friendly a community is the trial balloon. And if you, as a political official, allow drag queen story hour, then if I'm a predator, I know I've got your schools. It's really easy now. And it's only a matter of time till I'm going to get all the trans stuff into your schools. And what am I going to be doing with that? I'm grooming your kids. So you will be a haven for predators. If you're a community, if you're a state and you do the trans stuff, you are a predator friendly state, because you haven't got clue one, how to meaningfully identify the red flags of predators and the red flags of predation. And therefore you have made women and children ever increasingly vulnerable. And that's why shame on GenSpect.
Yeah, I agree. Especially because I I sat down and I read the context of contents. Excuse me. I sat down and read the contents as much as I could I feel like I've sort of blacked it out of my memory because they're just such a boring read and also just so ridiculous. I read Phil Illy's book and it's preposterous to me. I don't understand how anybody could read that book and not come away thinking that he is a totally out there, predator. He clearly wants to sell and package this idea of auto heterosexuality and auto homosexuality. And I've noticed that he's starting to bring in a gaggle of women who are either still trans identified, but are quote unquote gender critical. They think the trans stuff is going too far, but they're still in the community and are still doing deviant things. Or women who have desisted or detransitioned. It's like he's become this sort of apostle of the gospels of auto heterosexuality. And I'm not quite sure, like, how do we attack this? Because he's selling this thing that is now infecting other people. He's giving them this mind virus of thinking that their fetish or their deviance is an innate, immutable characteristic that they were born as, and that it's appropriate then to teach it in schools and to children. He still wants to teach autosexuality to kids.
Why do you think?
I think he's hiding some stuff. Yeah.
Okay, think about this chart. Okay, if I'm a predator, ready? If I'm a predator, what goes through my mind, I had to work hard to figure out what is a predator thing. Okay, so I know him like the back of my hand. Okay, and it's not funny. None of this is funny. Okay, think about the kind of people I worked with. So if anybody's misinterpreting my smile, it's kind of vicarious trauma, quite frankly. Okay, having heard, I've seen everything in terms of criminal, where all the criminals go that have perpetrated heinous stuff. They go to prison. They're on my caseload. Okay, so I really want people to understand. That's why I'm so passionate about it. Okay, and unless you've worked with predators for years, if somebody has a strong opinion about this, my response is this: So you've never worked with predators, but you really want to give your opinion of this. Help me understand this. What's it to you? Where did you get this interest? Why do you feel the need to come to Phil Illy's defense? What is it about Phil Illy that you think is credible? Because I know what Phil Illy's about. And Phil Illy is playing people for fools. He's just trying to figure out how stupid they are. He's getting a kick out of this. That's all. So the best way to understand Phil Illy is this. Watch any documentary about NXIVM sex cult.
Yes. Yeah.
That's all. Epstein. Could Epstein have been Epstein by himself?
No.
Who is doing prison time?
Ghislaine.
Max. Most sophisticated predators will always have a female counterpart, either useful idiot, but they're typically not useful idiots. They're knowledgeable individuals. So around every deviant man, you're going to have a woman on some level, I'm pretty convinced, meaning the more sophisticated it is, then you don't have, well, trauma bonding, or she's naive, or she's got trauma. No. How about Heidi Fleiss? Do you think that was trauma bonded? No, what is she doing? She's making a lot of cash. How about Allison Mack? She's making a lot of cash. It is multi-level marketing. So if you have a woman who is relatively intelligent, who seems just as intense about singing the party line, putting forth this propaganda, pushing this narrative, my contention is this, and if she's really aggressive, like we'll go after somebody's professional license, we'll not stop, we'll create these brigades, and we'll double down, we'll try to harm somebody's reputation and personal life and professional life, Sierra Ware, then one has to assume, if they're smart, there's something in it for them.
Yeah. And something
so have these duos. So whenever you see these two, male, female, it's a team.
Yeah.
And that should raise concerns. I won't say definitively, but I'll tell you what, that should raise concerns about the concept of exploitation and or trafficking. What is trafficking? Moving people. How about if you just arrange things? We call it exploiting. If you're using and arranging things for your benefit, you're manipulating somebody. You have to perfect the art of impression management than to manipulate someone. So if people can get you to go along with what they're saying, they're already manipulating you. And then it's sales. Multi-level marketing is people that are exploiting one another for financial gain. So if you happen to see a male-female team that seems just as energetic and may even go on a podcast together trying to dumb down safeguarding, a high bar safeguarding male, female, you and I, male, female, but we're talking about what? The need to have a high bar of safeguarding, meaning no men in women's spaces, no men where women and minors who are gender confused. If a guy appears to have a paraphilia or perversion, he shouldn't be in there. So correct. Proper, clear boundaries. If you have a male-female dynamic duo who are lowering the bar on safeguarding, you have a very high likelihood that you have, by degree, exploitation going on, and they're really good. They have to be good at sales first. So a sociopath comes before a psychopath. Sociopath is all about sales. Psychopath is about, so to be, in my estimation, prior to being a psychopath, you have to be a sociopath. Prior to that, it's a narcissist. Why? Because you have to have a good self-esteem to feel you have the right to cross people's boundaries. The more sophisticated or skill set you have, you now have mastered the art of sociopathy. And then psychopathy, after you keep taking and there's no boundaries left, then why continue? Because now you've morphed, you've gone downhill, and now you've gone from being motivated by what you can get to how you can impact in a negative way, the harm you can have. How far can you take it? That's a psychopath. So a sociopath is all about cost-benefit analysis, what's going to benefit me. A psychopath is how I'm getting off on seeing you be harmed, negative effect. And so, but all of them on the surface, the smarter they are, the less the less they will look freakish. Why? Because the more freakish they look, or they'll do it out of shock value. That's why you're going to have one of two extremes. So a genuine psychopath will either dress in a really very normal fashion, very appropriate, so they don't stand out, or they stand out a lot, and there's the shock value. So if I want to stand out a lot, how do I dress?
Yeah.
And now I'm going to be bold about it. It's the big lie theory. It's shock, and nobody's going to question it because it's the emperor's new clothes, right? Everybody can see it, but nobody wants to say it until somebody comes along and says, "Hey."
Yeah. When I look back on my time in the drag community, it did bring out elements to my personality where I look back, I'm ashamed of like the way I was thinking, because I was thinking in a way, I wouldn't say sociopathic, but, I was having dark thoughts that I think were absolutely manufactured by the people that I was around. Like this wasn't a natural thing for me to be thinking that way. It's because I was saturated in the deviance of the drag community. And thankfully, by leaving it, I've managed to, clean my mind. I've renewed my soul. I've done a lot of repenting. Yom Kippur every year, I'm still always thinking about I need to clean my soul of this stuff because it was really dark. And I don't get into details because it's not appropriate, but that stuff, it's like the drag community and the trans community and all these fetishes, all these identities around these fetishes are taking vulnerable people and almost giving them if they don't already have them, the symptoms of very severe cluster B personality disorders, the sociopathy and psychopathy. If they don't already have it, if they're just somebody who maybe has complex post-traumatic stress, it's like turning the dial up on these antisocial behaviors by nature of the people that you're hanging around with and the activities that you're engaging in.
There you go. Again, Caitlin, what I would say is this, and hopefully this will be helpful for anybody that's listening. Like in any of those quote unquote communities, let's say the trans community, again, it's a misnomer, but I'll use that term. Okay, or any alternative lifestyle. Okay. The further into it somebody gets, it's really going to come down to one of two populations, predator or prey. Those that have never been perped on and those that have been perped on. That's really what it comes down to. Now the question is, and so that's why, by the way, this misnomer of conversion therapy, it's a sham, this idea. Why? Because if somebody truly was made to do something against their will, then there should be police charges, criminal charges, and or civil. I don't see a lot of civil suits. Okay, what I hear is these manufactured stories like Sam Brinton. There's another guy that just came out with this. I went to Liberty University and I went through conversion therapy. No, wait. So this person, out of all the colleges in the world, all the options, he goes to a conservative Christian school that has a code of conduct. And he goes there and says they were trying to brainwash him. Okay. And then he went there and he realized, wait a second, I'm not my true authentic self. And now, because I haven't listened to the whole thing, but I just know it, right? Okay, to go to a school like that, you don't have to, but to go there, you can go anywhere you want. Go to UC Berkeley. Okay, but he goes to a school that comes from a perspective and a frame of reference that says, if you come here, this is what we're about. Do you agree? And here's a code of conduct. And sign your name. Voluntary. So he voluntarily goes there and then complains that they're consistent. But they're practicing conversion therapy. So he can pile on them. And now my question is he really as dumb and naive as he's saying, or is that a plant? And did he have plans to do this to try to raise this issue again of conversion therapy? Now, having said that, conversion therapy, by the way, is what cults say when somebody tries to get out of the cult. And what they will say about the parents or about somebody who's trying to help get the victim away from somebody that's unduly influencing them. You want people to be able to make decisions, fully informed decisions that are in their best interest, which comes from giving them all the information and allowing them to figure out what's going to be in their best interest and allow for buyer's remorse. In the trans movement, we call that detransitioners, but what do the detransitioners get? What kind of behavior on the part of the community? You get cult-like behavior. They support them while they're coming in, but heavens, if they want to leave, what happens? Oh, they're piled on viciously.
Yep,
Only
I experienced that. Yeah,
Yet
I experienced that myself.
Say, oh, somebody must have practiced conversion therapy. Okay, no. Are we in it for that person's best interest, or are we using that person? If the person comes in, fine. If they leave, fine. You should support that person if you really care about that person's best interest. Sorry, I had a little segue, a little tangent there, but
it makes sense though, because they are pushing for like banning conversion therapy under the guise it's about the trans. It's about the trans, and it's about eroding boundaries. And I know that.
Sorry to interrupt, but here's what people need to understand. That's floated first, prior to what? That has been used to make sure therapists, quote unquote, never go there. Never go where? If some young person is being sucked into an alternative lifestyle, that means I, as a therapist, I can talk about everything else in the world. But what happens if the person actually came in to talk about they're not sure what lifestyle they want to be a part of? And if I help them do values clarification for themselves, and they decide it's not for me any longer. I mean, it's not for them any longer, and they leave, I can be accused of what?
Mm. Yeah.
And therefore, somebody, let's say their cult leader, oh, I'm sorry, their big brother, there's some, right? All of a sudden, the person realizes, I don't want to be a part of this lifestyle anymore. I'm going to go tell my roommate that I'm moving out. Well, let's say roommate had a couple of friends with benefits and a couple other things. Now that relationship, that person's left the community. Well, maybe there was extra stuff going on. Maybe somebody's losing out on money now. So now the predator can say, so let's say the client doesn't claim conversion therapy. Now the predator can say, hey, they went to that therapist. We're going to file a complaint on behalf of that therapist because, look, that person left the community. Look at what that therapist is doing. When the therapist doesn't set the goals, doesn't set the agenda for therapy, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a therapist. Somebody comes in and you say, what would you like to work on? And he says, you know what? I'm betwixt and between in my lifestyle. Okay, what do you want? I don't really know. Okay, let's explore. Is it working for you? Okay, am I converting someone? Meaning that's actual normal therapy. The client sets the goal. So if he comes in and says, I'm in an alternative lifestyle. I don't know if I want to do that because it doesn't seem to fit with what I say is my ascribed religious perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's help you explore that. And let's say the person says, you know what, I think I'm going to get out of the lifestyle. Okay. Did I convert that person?
Mm.
I didn't do anything. Now, if I strap them down, and again, if I strap them down, water torture, electricity, I think you ought to call the police on that person.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's a verboten topic. I read there's a book by Douglas Murray called The Madness of Crowds, and he brought up how, technically there is no confirmation of a genetic predisposition to homosexuality. And so because we're not allowed to go there and question the born this way narrative, then, there's no way to kind of have these difficult conversations about, okay, well, what is outside influence? What's external influence? What's innate? And unfortunately, I've noticed that then, the trans movement then kind of piggybacked on this born this way narrative that isn't actually scientifically proven. And so it's like once there was that foot in the door of, it's always innate, there's no way that it can be anything else, then that opened the door for the cross-dressers to say, this is my innate sexuality. And I'm of the belief that we don't know. It's still it's a mystery. I've met people where it's like, I don't think this is actually something you can change. Like you're so flamboyant and living this, and I don't know where it came from. And it was from a young age. And it was just something that when I was growing up in childhood, I was kind of the girl that the guys who were too afraid to come out, like, hung out with. And so, but it was obvious that they were gay. I don't know if they were born that way or it happened or something happened, but I'm of the belief that, like, we should be able to at least talk about it and have a conversation, because there is no actual proof either way where this comes from. If somebody does
let me speak to that just for a moment. Okay. I haven't found an exception. I have not found an exception to what I'm going to say. Okay. I'm open to it, but I just haven't found an exception. Show me any gay guy, especially the more effeminate or flamboyant. Okay. If you ask them about their childhood, and if they're honest, they will be able to tell you when their sexual boundaries were violated. 100% of the time. I have yet to find, now, that's different than the predatorial guys. Mm-hmm. A guy can go into the homosexual lifestyle, never be perked on, but you're going to see a predator and he's in it, because men will go deviant. And once a guy goes deviant, you're going to see pretty predictable stages. You'll see it in that chart, by the way. where a guy will, the age, it's always going to start with adult porn. So adult woman, always, always, always. Canner and others will lie through their teeth, but that's how it happens. The age will then decrease. As it decreases, other things he's into other things as well. Things are getting darker. The themes are getting darker. The oppressive, the submissive, the dominance is starting to get more and more. As far as the pure predators, if they're not the victims. And eventually, right about as the age is getting less, you're going to see the introduction somewhere in there in bestiality. Bestiality porn always comes before child porn, inevitably. You're not going to find an exception in police records where, with the stash of child rape porn that they find, there's always going to be bestiality. Always. So that people need to understand, by the time somebody's perping on a kid, the kind of stuff they've been into. Now, those kind of guys will also oftentimes be perping on boys, males. Those are the kind of guys that will get into the male community. Those will be the ones that are going to be the predators. Those guys weren't perped on. If you've been sexually abused in one way or another, you're going to be compulsive or you're going to be reactive. Where's the best place to study sex offenders in prison or sexual victims in prison, in a male prison? On the drug and alcohol unit, not in the sex offender treatment. Okay. If a guy can make it all the way through high school without showing any behavioral symptoms, one way or the other, acting out, acting in, withdrawn as a way of acting in, they weren't sexually perped on. Because a kid cannot sit on that level of angst and that level of agitation, that level of trauma, and not appear normal. Okay, even the ones that are the most extreme, SRA and MK Ultra, there's going to be indicators, but usually those are the really good kids. Okay, but by the time somebody's busted for being a predator, if there's been no verifiable childhood history of if there's no paper trail that the perp can't point to. All of them will say they were because they've said the magic words that they were just acting out what happened to them. That's a lie. If the guy was sophisticated, how do you know he's sophisticated? You look at the reaction of people around him. If people say, well, we knew it, we told the kids to stay away from him, he's a creepy guy. Okay, that's not a sophisticated one. The sophisticated one is not him, not Pastor so-and-so, not Coach so-and-so. Okay, the question is, how was he perping? How many victims does he have? Not Scoutmaster so-and-so. How did he become so affable, so responsible? Okay. He's not reactive, and therefore he's not antisocial. Therefore, he wasn't perped on. He just got into deviance. So you can have men that are perping on other men. They will be the aggressors. They'll be the manipulators. They weren't perped on, but they will recruit. They're going to groom. Who do you groom? Younger. And so that's where you have these younger guys, junior high and high school. Scoutmaster, what was he doing? He was grooming, 92,000 victims in the Scouts or something like that. Yeah. Okay. So those are the kids that will either go one direction or the other. So inevitably, though, at least what, in my experience, 30 years counseling people, I've never seen an effeminate guy who's in the lifestyle who wasn't perped on. If nobody had perped on him, in my estimation, he'd be doing just fine. And he would have chosen maybe differently, but right now he can't choose anything differently. He's been sucked into this lifestyle. Now, if he ever wants to reconsider, now he's going to face backlash.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting point of view. I think there's, it's controversial because I've seen when you've brought this up before, there's a lot of people who push back, especially lesbians who are like, no, I wasn't abused, nothing like that. But when I was in the drag community, there were a lot of men, especially, who did confess that like they were perped on at a young age. An older man would groom them, 12, 13 years old. And I'm not saying it was everybody, but there was a lot of that. And I read somewhere that out of sex offenders, or men who were arrested for molesting children, like 33% of them identified as homosexual. And people would say, oh, 70% are straight, so that's proof that there's not a problem within the gay community of pederasty. But if you bring it down, if you do per capita, it's about 1 to 2% of the population is male homosexual. So they're making up 33% of these cases. So there has to be an issue, and we're not allowed to talk about it. We're not allowed to bring it up because it's considered bigoted. And it's like this no taboo area. And it really bothers me that we can't even bring up at all that sort of information, because it's going to be offensive.
Caitlin, it's a public safety issue.
Yeah, we need that's why I'm concerned about it. Yeah,
that's right. Because if we can't talk about this, if I can't see who potentially is a high risk, well, you're profiling. Well, you better. Now, does that mean I'm mean to someone? No. But if you can't discern, I'm going to use an unrelated example. Okay. But if you're in public transportation and you can't discern if somebody's walked on with a bomb or not, right? How about situational awareness? When it comes to health and safety, we had better be therefore boundaries. We had better be able to profile. Why? Because if we're wrong, what are the implications? Now, does it mean that we shun people? No, it simply means this. If in doubt, we got to go with safety.
Yeah.
Guy in a blue dress shows up at a gen spec. What am I going to do? I'm going to show him the door. Why? Safety. And I care about other people. I don't care if this poor guy feels sad. He can go be sad outside the door. But we need to help him grow in terms of his own character and maturity to think outside of himself. We're not going to play to his narcissism. We're going to help him begin to think of effect upon others. So all the men in their little blue dresses, whether they have underwear on or not, we want to help them understand the world doesn't revolve around them.
Yeah.
And so no going into the women's bathroom, no going into women's sports. I know you're sad. I know you placed 500th in the sprint, and now you get the gold in the girls, but no, we're going to help you with your self-esteem rather than you invade women's sports.
Yeah. And honestly, for me right now, the bigger concern are the quote unquote good ones, the ones who say, oh, I know I'm a man. I know that I'm not really female.
Okay.
Because then my response is, Go ahead.
My response is, well, then you know all the more how much you're BSing everybody.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
What a joke! Like, if Phil were to say, "Oh, it's autosexuality," here's my initial response. Let's say if Phil and I were talking, he says, "Oh, John, I'm an autosexual." Yeah, I know you have sex with people in automobiles, Phil. Well, no, John. I just, and I would do this. You're just what, Phil? Well, I'm just really hypersexual. I understand that. You're self-evident. Well, no, I just have an urge. Well, yeah, I have urges too. Well, no, but you don't understand my urges. Well, you have your urges. I have my urges. And, well, I just have to express myself. So you just have to be narcissistic and screw everybody else. Keep going, Phil. Give me every excuse you want to push boundaries. And for shock value, because, Phil, you and I both know what you're about. So go clean up your act, stop your porn, and think about doing something productive in your life that will help other people quit being narcissistic, self-absorbed, attention-seeking, and pushing boundaries, because you're making it dangerous for women and children, and you know it, you love it, playing people for fools, and you're selling books on top of it because you're trying to find out just how stupid people are, and you're better than Barnum and Bailey. Any questions? Am I missing anything, Phil? No wonder Phil won't come on my podcast and debate me.
Yeah.
That's all. Yeah. Phil is loving playing people for fools as he getting off behind closed doors. And I don't know why people took offense at this. All he simply said is this. For those of you that were in Gen Spec and sat with Phil, do you know where his hands were all the time? And do you know if he had any underwear on? Okay, well, you're only shocked because you don't deal with men like Phil. before Phil gets busted, he would be like Sam Brinton. And Sam Brinton stole women's underwear. Remember, he stole the designer clothing. Where did he get the designer clothing? He stole them from suitcases. Isn't it interesting? He didn't return anything, but he still used the suitcase for multiple trips. But the question is this: why didn't he return? Why didn't they ever find the women's underwear? 4 separate suitcases. I'll tell you why and you know Sam Brinton went brain dead. Here's a guy that's in charge, undersecretary of in the Department of Energy, goes to MIT, bright guy, but suddenly he's brain dead. He can't figure out where the underwear went. I'll tell you exactly where the underwear went. He was masturbating in them.
Yeah, of course.
But nobody wants to believe it. Why? Because nobody's worked with perps. And we don't want to believe that guys that look so sensitive could actually be agenda-driven, playing the public for fools. And this has to do with the public safety, safety of women and children. We need to take it seriously. Do not be played by these guys. And sexologists that want to defend this, I can tell you what they're probably doing behind closed doors. And
I think
they're coming up with research to justify it.
Yeah, I think one of the most. Sorry to interrupt, but I think one of the most shocking things I heard was J. Michael Bailey on. I think it was Bailey. It was either Cantor or Bailey on a podcast with, I believe, a couple of the Gen Spec people talking about a boy that he believed had autogynephilia.
Right.
And I couldn't believe my ears because it's, first of all, to sexualize a child like that. Second of all, I mean, to claim to be a sexologist and not even take into account the grooming aspect of it, especially because I believe the father was a cross-dresser. And so to not even think for a second, I wonder if the cross-dressing father did something to the son. No, it's actually the son has autogynephilia, just like old dad. And so I don't understand how anybody takes these men seriously.
No, and that was I listened to that same clip, and there was Sasha Ayad and there was Stella O'Malley, therapist.
Yes, it was
and
those two,
Bailey's telling the story. All 3 of them are mandated reporters, and it apparently never came to their mind that this kid was perped on. Why? We have, at the very least, we have 3 mandated reporters that can't spot the red flags of sexual abuse. That's a concern.
Yeah. Well, we have been talking for about an hour and a half, which is around what I wanted to keep it. And I think we touched on a lot of great things. And I very much appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. I'm thankful for the charts that you've made. They're very, very helpful. And I think this was an illuminating conversation. You know, there's definitely going to be things that I'll get pushback on. I know we kind of delved into theories of homosexuality that'll probably get me in trouble with some of my audience because I still don't know where I stand. You have your very firm belief that it's always a result of abuse. I think that there's probably, who knows, my personal belief is I think there's maybe some sort of population control kind of aspect to it, social aspects, environmental aspects. I'm not really fully set either way on where it comes from, but I do think we should be able to talk about it. And
Caitlin, what I would say is it may not be abuse. I would say more than likely, and I haven't really found an exception, there was grooming that took place.
Grooming, okay, yeah.
It made them susceptible later on.
Yeah, and that could very well be. But you know, I just want to make clear to my audience that, like, I still don't know where I stand. I'm open to asking questions, but I know where you stand, and I still think that you have the right to have your opinion and your right to speak on it. And I'm so glad that you're doing this work with regards to fighting against the trans agenda, and especially fighting against charlatans like the Gen Specters, who clearly are either controlled opposition or in it for money, or really they don't care about child safeguarding. They just want to make their coin. They just want to be able to continue the gender industry so that they can continue having jobs. So,
That's right.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Do you want to plug your channel? Like, where can people find you?
Yeah, I have my YouTube channel, which is Jon K. Uhler. I think LPC. But I have a couple of sites. One is SurvivorSupport.net. That's my primary site. The other is a training site, has more of my clinical information on there. It's churchprotect.org. And if you're part of a faith-based community or a church, I do trainings on predator awareness, and quite frankly, how to protect your congregation. Because next to the trans movement, actually, the number one place that sophisticated predators like to go are religious communities, or churches, synagogues, mosques. That's their favorite hunting ground right there. Look at what happened to the Catholic Church.
Yes.
I'm going to be doing a series on the Catholic Church probably in a few months with a former priest that blew the whistle on sexual abuse, and they kicked him out. So that'll be a good one. And then I have a site. We're going to pick up interviewing here in the next few months. We've taken a little hiatus. It's unmaskingthetransmovement.com. I also have a blog. Haven't written anything in a while, but a lot of good information on there, especially if you want to find out about sexual predators and the trans movement as well. That is SurvivorSupport.us.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jon Uhler. It's been a pleasure. And everybody, I will keep you updated on the next stream and topic and all of that. So thank you for being here, everyone, and have a good night.